Are you ready to hear an inspirational hero tale about one of our four-legged friends? My name is Kim, and this is Harry Hero Tales. Welcome to episode 6 of Harry Hero Tales, Animals to the Rescue. I'm your host, Kim Hagel. In this episode, we will be traveling back farther than previous episodes by going back more than 130 years, all the way back to the late 19th century to tell the story of a hero named Owney. Our hero Owney is one of the most popular celebrities of his time and was known worldwide. He even had an audience with foreign leaders. The beginning of this story is a bit murky. I've found reports that Owney was first a pet of a man named Owen, who abandoned him, leading those who found him to simply name him Owney. But I also found reports that it was assumed he was a pet of someone they worked with, and when that person left, Owney refused to leave. Not having an owner, they simply named him Owney. However it began, Owney definitely appeared at what would become his home and source of his amazing travels, the United States Post Office in Albany, New York. Owney is described as a terrier mix. Judging from photographs still available on sites like the Smithsonian Postal Museum or Wikipedia, that is a perfect description. Based on information on the Smithsonian website, he was a fairly small dog, about 20 inches in height. So this small dog showed up at the post office in Albany in 1887, either following a clerk there or he belonged to the clerk, and Owney began to make it his home. Apparently he loved to sniff the mail and the mail bags and was even known to curl up and sleep on the bags around the office. Owney must have been a well-trained and polite guest because he wasn't kicked out or forced to wait outside. The staff allowed him to come in and stay among them as they worked. Eventually, the clerk who had been associated as his owner left the office, but Owney was happy there and stayed, becoming the Albany Post Office dog. Owney apparently developed such an attachment to the mailbags, he began to follow them on their mail routes. There are descriptions documenting that he seemed very attentive in making sure they were properly handled and transported. He was even described as diligently guarding them, only allowing postal staff to touch or open them. Over time, Owney started to follow or ride the wagons transporting mail bags and ultimately graduated to even jumping on large train boxcars to ride with the postal bags as they were being moved. As Owney began to ride the train, staff began to see his appearance on the train as good luck, as no train he ever rode on had an issue or an accident. So with the post office in Albany's mail being located at a key junction point along the New York Central Railway system, which was one of the biggest railway lines in the U.S. at that time, the routes and connections could take the mail all the way to Chicago or even farther west and even north to Boston, New York, could go out to Cleveland and more. So Owney didn't just stay local. He traveled with the mail on these trains to each and every one of these cities. His home base postal friends began to be concerned about Owney's safety, and they wanted to make sure that anyone that encountered him would know that he was associated with the post office in Albany. They created a special collar with a tag that stated Owney, Post Office, Albany, New York. So when he appeared on a train far from their site, he was cared for by other postal staff members along the mail route. Eventually, like many travelers do today with stamps on their passport or charms they collect to designate where they've been or sites they visited, Owney began to collect badges from other offices to identify the post offices he visited along his travels. After collecting many, many metal badges, he could be heard coming easily as they would jingle an alert to his arrival like welcoming bells. I can imagine that the post offices, discovering Owney traveling with the mailbags arriving at their office, wanted to let the Albany office know that he was received with kindness and was welcomed any time he made an appearance. But these volume of badges eventually became too heavy for the little terrier mix to wear around his collar, and someone eventually got him a jacket to wear, and the badges were attached and continued to multiply. Apparently, the jacket even became too much for little Owney as he arrived at a new location. They would sometimes help by removing some of the badges for him and return them to Albany so the terrier could travel without discomfort or injury. It's been speculated that he received more than 1,000 badges in his lifetime, but the actual number is undocumented. The Smithsonian National Postal Museum currently has 372 confirmed Owney badges on display to this day. A well-known story of Owney's travels occurred in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Upon his arrival with the mail transported there, Owney was actually locked up in a kennel. The postmaster of Montreal did feed and care for him while he was there. He ultimately sent a bill to the post office in Albany for his food and lodging in the amount of $2.50. The Albany office, of course, paid the bill, which freed Owney to return home. He was sent there by the Montreal Postal Service and ultimately arrived safe and sound. Owney's adventures did secure public interest, and he appeared in many newspapers, with several publishing his arrival in their town or to track his known whereabouts. This certainly helped his home office keep up with where the little terrier was. They had some scares of him being lost or even dead, but Owney seemed to have a way of remaining safe and being cared for on his journeys. He ultimately turned up somewhere. One of his most celebrated trips occurred in 1895, when Owney was probably around 9 years old. Having made his way all the way west to Washington State, Owney departed from Tacoma, Washington on August 19th, and eventually made his way onto steamships of that time with his beloved mailbags. He ultimately arrived in Asia and then traveled through Europe, not arriving back in New York until just before Christmas 4 months later. There were reports in newspapers during this time of Owney visiting Japan and even having an audience with the Emperor of Japan, who apparently awarded him with 2 passports and several medals with the Japanese coat of arms on them. His triumphant return home in December was celebrated nationwide by the American people, and eventually the world began to learn about this traveling postal dog with the adventurous spirit. It's reported that when his traveling days came to an end, he had likely traveled more than 143,000 miles with the post office. Now, as Owney aged, he began to show signs of weariness and likely fatigue. Understandable. There are also reports of some post offices actually not allowing Owney in, and clerks were even instructed to ban him from their trains. One disturbing comment from a Chicago manager actually calling him a mongrel. If he'd begun to show signs of aggression or bad behavior, it is understandable for some offices to want to protect their employees and keep Owney out. But what happened to Owney in June of 1897 is a very sad and unfortunate end to a beloved mascot and ambassador. Owney arrived in Toledo, Ohio, And there are reports that upon his arrival, a postal clerk tied Owney up to a post in hopes of keeping him there for a photo with the local newspaper. Now, Owney was not used to being tied and did not respond well to this treatment. He either bit or attempted to attack the postal worker. A U.S. Marshal was called in to assist, and he shot him and killed poor Owney on orders of the Toledo postmaster on June 11, 1897. National newspapers responded with some very strongly worded articles about Owney's death. One such article appeared in the Chicago Tribune calling it an execution. A very public battle began to be revealed in newspapers across the country between the U.S. Post Office management and the postal workers, with Owney's death being a focal point for the division. For years, there had been struggles to align processes and efficiencies to eliminate what management called wasted time or slacking among the clerk staff. And the clerks felt underappreciated. Now, with Owney's death, the postal staff refused to simply bury their beloved mascot. Across the U.S., the postal staff asked to have Owney honored and recognized for his contributions, which, given the publicity and coverage he gained for the U.S. Postal Service for years and globally, seemed to me to be more than appropriate. The postal staff won with either public sentiment or their contributing demands on their side, and Owney's journey and contributions were honored in a way that was acceptable at this time. Now, I'm not a fan of taxidermy. Sorry to offend anyone who is. I'm not judging here, just stating my preference personally. But I can say that this choice to preserve Owney to be remembered for hundreds of years later does have its benefits. Owney was stuffed and presented to the United States Postal Service headquarters after his death, as the public and postal workers wanted, rather than being buried. His stuffed remains were even displayed during the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, Missouri. They were ultimately presented in 1911 to the Postal Museum. Now, I have personally visited these preserved remains of Owney at the Smithsonian Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. So while I'm not a huge fan of taxidermy, I can acknowledge that I personally benefited more than 100 years later from the choice to have Owney honored in this way. It made me happy to see him in person. It made his story even more real to me, and I was moved to be able to pay tribute to this remarkable little traveler. I highly recommend to anyone traveling to Washington, D.C. and taking in any of the museum tours to stop by the Postal Museum and pay a visit to Owney in person. Owney's achievements have been honored in other ways as well. He was featured on a TV program that actually first brought this story to me. Owney was featured on an episode of Mysteries at the Museum, and this show is the reason I knew to look for him in Washington, D.C. I was fascinated by the little terrier and his travels and began to search for more information about him. Owney was also commemorated in 2011 with his very own forever stamp by the United States Postal Service. There are several books published about Owney, including one by the Postal Museum in 2012 titled Owney, Tales from the Rails. Poetry was written about Owney by postal clerks while he was traveling, and included this one by a clerk in Detroit. Owney is a tramp, as you can plainly see. Only treat him kindly and take him long with ye. I'm hoping with this podcast episode I'm doing just that and continuing to take Owney along with all of us. While that only touches the surface of this amazing hairy hero, we have to leave it there for this episode. If you know of a great Harry Hero tale and would like to hear it on this podcast, email us at harryherotales@gmail.com. For more information on this program, visit our website, www.harryherotales.com. That's TAILS.com. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and wherever you get your podcast. This is a Southpaw Productions podcast, edited, produced, and hosted by me, Kim Hagel. Opening and closing music provided by Mary Selvage. Be sure to follow her on Instagram at Selvage613 for her live show schedule, and check out her complete catalog of music available on Spotify, Apple Music, and more. And remember, there are hairy four-legged heroes all around us. Who knows, you might even adopt one. I've adopted many little heroes from some amazing animal rescue organizations, and I've featured 2 on my website, the All-American Dachshund Rescue and the French Bulldog Rescue Network. If you are looking to rescue your next hero or would like to help with transport or financial support, I highly recommend both of these organizations. Neither are affiliated with this program in any way, but both have my sincere gratitude and support. Thank you to all the heroes of the world, and a special shout out for hairy heroes everywhere.